Don't. No. 3 seconds.
Are we ready to go? Ding, dicka, ding, 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 dicka, ding, ding.
All yours.
Okie doke. This and Dat. Welcome to This and Dat. 5 o'clock Monday through Friday, 3 o'clock on Saturday, and weekly marks at 3 o'clock on Sunday. And currently, we're in Don Munro's book, up to chapter 5. And I apologize for my reading, et cetera, complete with digressions, et cetera, et cetera. But I figure this is the best way to go through it. There'll be a little math today. It's not very much math. It's essentially identifying the variables of constant and variable capital, surplus, a few other things that are the normal algebra that we've seen in Marx's Capital, which we are looking at on Sundays. We're on essentially plowing through book volume number 2. So Marx's theory of land, rent, and crises. I give you the links at the front end so that you can get your own copy, which is nice. Thank God for open libraries. And chapter 5 is important because it identifies a kind of an entity that functions as capital, but has, the ways in which we translate it is somewhat abstract. It is a anomaly and in some ways that Marx eventually deals with when he talks in volume 3 about financial capital, when he implies that there's some sort of thing called financial capital, a development from merchant capital, and that is not industrial capital, although it is when you consider you're paying rent in the form of, depreciation, amortization, a variety of other things are actually rent-like. And so I think it's important to not get too fixated on the idea that Ricardo talks about rent in one way. And I think it's important to introduce that idea, to think about Ricardian rent in that context. And I may come back to this tomorrow when at 5 o'clock, when I look at the second part of this chapter. The reason why rent is important, and we all pay it, we actually pay for it in a variety of interesting and problematic ways, right? Rent-a-cars are complicated objects, for example. So, and we might say that, in fact, when we lease a car, that's a kind of rent. You could say, to expand the idea, is that our owning automobiles is we never really own them. We just rent them for the span of their life. There are a couple of people who hold on to their vehicles forever. And in some ways, that's never renting. But, the second you trade it in for something, whatever, you're engaging in a kind of rent system. So that doesn't dissolve the notion. It just simply it shows how capital operates in a variety of interesting ways. Just as the operating capitalist pumps surplus labor and thereby surplus value and surplus product in the form of profit out of the laborer, so the landlord in turn pumps a portion of this surplus value or surplus product out of the capitalist in the form of rent. Rent is central to many current crises in capitalist cities. The power of rent is often associated with a variety of social issues, such as the long-term rises in property prices, the uneven development of housing prices in cities, and restructuring of publicly funded seniors' care in Canada, for example. The price of a house or other real estate properties directly affected by rent because property prices are essentially capitalized rent. Now, this question of prices and equivalence to rent is deeply problematic, and we know this, of course, because the state, subsidizes or controls rent in a variety of ways. You want to think about how rents operate in in semi-fascinating ways. For residential tenants, government initiatives such as capital gains taxes, negative gearing policies, and investment incentives can distort the rental housing market by causing more high-value, high-rent stock being brought into the rental sector and low-cost, low-rent properties dropping out, exacerbating homelessness. Now, homelessness is, we can talk at great length about that. In some ways, it's really not about rent, because technically we could subsidize every unhoused person in the United States without a dent in the economy. But anyway, the authority of rent also controls commercial tenants, as was shown during the COVID-19 pandemic in the early 2020s. It's weird that we talk about the early 2020s. When businesses around the world found they were obliged by the terms of their lease to pay rent even if they had no income due to the lockdowns. Marx proposed that there are three main forms of rent in capitalism. There is absolute rent, which in his mind, and of course there's a refutation of it by some Marxists, so this is a controversial problem, or partially controversial, determines whether capital will invest on land at all. There are two forms of differential rent, which in different ways influence the extent to which capital will invest in city centers or in suburban regions. However, Marx also recognized rent caused a theoretical problem for his theory of value. Capitalist rent, as with other modes of production, is always a portion of the surplus labor provided by workers. However, rent is not a portion of the profit captured by capitalists, but additional to profit. Rent is always a surplus over and above profit. The problem then arises. If capitalists appropriate all the unpaid surplus value as their profit, which kind of is a general sense of it, what is the source of the additional surplus value that comprises rent? Now, this is this question of fictitious capital that we'll eventually get to, all of the things that make, with respect, the concept of a virtual capital viable. This chapter addresses these issues. It analyzes the economic systems where landed property captures differential rent and absolute rent, DR and AR, from capital. It will show that DR, differential rent, arises when land interferes in the process that establishes the market value of a commodity, and AR arises when land interferes in the process that establishes the price of production for a commodity. So there's a subtlety there, and in fact, you can see beneath that that's why some Marxists would, ignore or set aside or assume constant AR. The magnitude of rent that can be captured from capital by landed property, however, is not limitless. The very nature of the rent appropriation process puts limits on how much can be captured. To understand how DR and AR arise, differential rent and absolute rent arise, and drive crises in contemporary capitalist cities, therefore, it is necessary to delve deep into the processes of how the market value of a commodity is determined and how the price of production of a commodity is established. Remember that commodities are not, the kind of fixed object. They are an abstract concept that Marx begins Capital Volume 1 with to help articulate the kind of abstract interrelations of material reality and how, the commodity serves as a kind of weird proxy for it. First, we consider the case of how market value is formed, thus making it possible for landowners to distract differential rent from capitalists. Market value. As noted in Chapter 2, capitalism consists of a continuous, relentless, and crisis-ridden cycle of capital accumulation. In general terms, an amount of capital of value M is invested to buy commodities. With an equivalent value of C, the commodities then are transformed by labor in production, P, where they gain an enhanced value, C prime, arising from the unpaid surplus value, profit provided by workers. And the new commodities with their enhanced value, C prime, are then sold for an equivalent amount of value, M prime. As a result, the capitalist realizes a larger magnitude of value, M prime, that is M plus the change in M, than was originally invested, M. The general formula for this cycle, as we saw before, for this general formula for the cycle of investment, production, and realization of capital is summarized as M dash C dot 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 P dot 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 C prime dash M prime. That sounds more complicated when you articulate it, but when you see it on the page, it's fairly simple and pretty common to most Marxist analyses. Within this general formula are numerous detailed economic processes. To solve the problem of rent, of where surplus value for rent originates, where all surplus value created by labor is captured as profit by capital, it is necessary to focus on the way commodities are realized for money. That is, what occurs in detail in the C prime dash M prime phase, that is that third realization phase of the overall process for the production and realization of capital. The first process, which was necessary for the creation of rent, differential rent DR, is the establishment of the market value of the commodity. Consider any industrial sector where multiple capitalists are producing the same commodity in competition with each other. Each capitalist produces a commodity which embodies a particular quantity of value. The value embedded in commodity is made up of the value of the physical commodities used up to produce the commodity, called constant capital, CI. The value of the employee's labor used to transform the materials into the new commodity, and which is paid for with a wage, called variable capital, VI, plus the value provided by labor that was not paid for, surplus value, SI. So the value for each new individual commodity, therefore, is CI plus VI plus SI. It's just algebra. Don't get crazy about it. No capitalist in this industrial sector is the same. Each capitalist uses a different combination of physical commodities and technologies, C, and different magnitudes of labor time, V, and extracts different amounts of unpaid surplus value, S, from its workers. As a result, the commodities made by each capitalist have different magnitudes of value embodied in them. For example, capitalist A may produce a commodity that has a value of CA, VA, SA, while capitalist B, producing the same commodity, may have a commodity that has a value of CB plus VB plus SB, and so on. Having produced their commodities, the capitalist within each industry then has to realize the value of these individual commodities, CI plus VI plus SI, as money. To do so, each capitalist puts their commodities into the market to sell. It is here in this competitive marketplace with its many buyers and sellers that the market value of the commodity is established. Our capitalists present their commodities to the market for sale. As happens in all markets, capitalists who ask too high a price for the commodities will not sell them all, and capitalists who ask too low a price will sell them all, but at the risk of not making as large a profit as possible. Through this market bidding and correction process, an agreed market price, or in value terms, an agreed market value, is established for each particular commodity. Let me make a sidebar here and remind you that price does not necessarily equal value, and that these differences in commodities can be subtle. You know, the square footage of an apartment, for example, or having or not having a big enough refrigerator or whatever. Relative to the space in a building, let's put it that way. This market value is the average value of commodities produced in a single sphere, that is the industry sector, or more accurately, the individual value of the commodities produced under average conditions of the respective sphere, and forming the bulk of the products of that sphere. You're going to hear about spheres a lot. There are public spheres, private spheres. Spheres just merely means this sort of agglomeration of things, of a sectoral thing, and it's very permeable, let's put it that way. The market value of this particular commodity, established by the average conditions of production used to produce the commodities, is symbolized as CM plus VM plus SM to distinguish it from the value of the individual commodities, CI plus VI plus SI, produced by each capitalist in the industry. Conceptually, the market value of a commodity is similar to the contemporary concept of the wholesale price index, WPI, a measure of the average selling price of a representative basket of wholesale goods. This is a common measure of the wholesale price of each commodity, which is used by many contemporary bureaus of statistics around the world. Remember, this indexing is it's a kind of generalization. It is a kind of averaging, but it does not capture. In fact, in some ways, it doesn't capture the absolute average. But in other ways, it's a useful way of sort of pegging, as it were, certain elements of a large market of things. And indexicality in this particular concept is actually a very useful concept. For example, consider an industry sector where two capitalists, capitalist A and capitalist B, produce the same commodity. Capitalist A produces commodities very efficiently using labor-saving techniques that require far less labor. And now, labor-saving technologies in this context could be machines or it could be processes. Getting your workers to not walk a distance twice to get a certain supply for their workstation. Or more productively, where a set amount of capital and labor inputs produced a larger than industry average number of commodities. So quality and quantity in that sense. In this case, capitalist A discovers that their commodities, which have an individual value of CAVASA, is lower than industry average market value that this commodity sells for. That is CM plus VM plus SM. That is symbolically CM, VM, SM is greater than CA, VA, SA. That is, capitalist A sells the commodities in the market at the going market value, even though it cost only a certain amount to produce, which is lower. The outcome of the sale is that capitalist A realizes the surplus value SA they captured in production plus an extra amount of surplus value, symbolized as the difference between CM and CA. That is CA, VM, SM, CA, VA, SA. Marx calls this additional amount of surplus value captured from the sale of the commodity in the market the surplus of surplus value. So it's additional surplus, or it's a differential in that sense, or surplus profit. So there's no one profit, there's profits, right? On the other hand, capitalist B produces the same commodity in a relatively inefficient or less productive way. In this case, when capitalist B sells their commodities in the market at the average market-determined value for the commodity, they lose value. Capitalist B's commodities, which have an individual value of CB plus VB plus SB, is higher than the industry average market value that the commodity sells for, CM plus VM plus SM. So symbolically, CB is greater than CM, etc. As a result, when capitalist B sells their commodities at the going market value, capitalist B loses value. Depending on how inefficient or how unproductive capitalist B's production process is, when capitalist B sells their commodity in the market, they may lose all their profit, SB, and only receive an amount of money to pay for the cost of the commodities, that is CB plus VB, used up in production. In a worst case scenario, capitalist B will receive payment for their commodities, which does not even cover the cost to produce those commodities, and they'll go into debt or bankruptcy. And yes, this does happen. It happens every day. It is the kind of essence of capitalist competition. In the simple market industry sector, where capitalist A and capitalist B making the same commodity in different ways, the average market determined selling price of the commodity, that is the market value, produces a result that is similar to a zero-sum game. Zero-sum game is not like Schadenfreude. That is, I win, you lose. And that's kind of the Trump belief that the only way that an election is fair is if I win. Asshole. Where the magnitude of capitalist B's loss of value equals the magnitude of capitalist A's value gain. For clarity, it is worth briefly considering a different example expressed in monetary terms. Consider an industry where capitalist A and capitalist B make the same number of commodities using the same constant capital and exploit their workers at the same rate. They both make a profit of 100% of the cost of their workers. Now, following on this, and because I know that we're not going to be able to calculate numbers in our little brain, essentially you're comparing capitalist A, capitalist B, and capitalist A makes a total profit of $45 per commodity. And we'll see in the tables below how this kind of works. And I will spare you the mental anguish of trying to add things in your head. For this industry sector as a whole, capitalist A will continue to produce successfully because they're getting $45 profit, whereas capitalist B loses $15 per commodity. So capitalist B will be forced to modernize their technology, reduce labor costs, change work practices, and take other actions so it can compete against the more efficient capitalist A. With this explanation of the process, seems clear as mud, which establishes market value, makes it possible for more efficient firms to capture surplus profit. It is now possible to explain the source of differential rent, DR. To foreshadow Marx's argument, it is a surplus profit captured by the efficient firms, which is a value that is potentially available to be appropriated by landowners as differential rent. Nobody's going to pay their, people are going to have extra cash in their pocket in order to be able to afford rent. So it all seems fairly simple. The question is this ratio of differences. If you're using it to buy magic beans instead of paying the rent, you're going to get screwed somehow, unless you can find giants in the sky and gooses and golden eggs and shit. There are two types of differential rent, DR. The first, differential rent 1, DR1, arises when equal amounts of capital are invested on different types of land, lands with different locations, orientation, terrain, or other natural features that are attracted to capital and are not made by labor. So these are hitherto existing features of land. So there is a kind of environmental determined relation here. So you invest capital, get a plow or whatever, and use it on this this land. The presumption is, if you're making a comparison, that is a difference between land A and land B, using the same damn plow. The difference is you're plowing uphill or whatever, and in another case you're plowing on flat land, which usually has a kind of difference. Differential rent 2, that a DR2, arises when different amounts of capital are invested on equal lands. In both cases, differential rent rises because the intervention of land and property in production changes how market value is established. And this is very Ricardian in that sense. And so in differential rent 2, you may have the same plot A and plot B are the same level, let's put it that way, and same soil quality or whatever. In one case, use a tractor. In another case, use a plow. And that seems relatively simple and shows the different variable being operative, which is being held constant in each case. This section considers differential rent 1 and the next DR2. So assume DR1 for the moment. In all modes of production, an investment on land with the best situation will be more productive than an equal investment on the same land size of land in a poorly situated site. Consider again a simple example using the industry sector with two capitalists, capitalist A and capitalist B. It doesn't necessarily have to be about farms, remember. Assume both capitalists are equally efficient in their use of capital and labor. The only difference is capitalist A is located on the best situated site. That is, housing is built on a terrain that is flat, while capitalist B is located on the worst situated site. Housing is built on a terrain with a strong incline. Stuff rolls down, it's hard to, it's good in one way, but bad to get home in another way. As noted above, the market value for a commodity is established by the commodities produced under average conditions and forming the bulk of the products of an industry. In this present example, capitalist A and capitalist B have the same materials, technology, labor force, and rate of profit. The only difference is capitalist A is situated on the best land and capitalist B is situated on the worst land for production. In this case, it is not average conditions that establish the market value for the commodity, but the worst land establishes the market value. Simple algebra, and therefore determines how much surplus profit the capitalist on the better located and land will be able to capture. Why does the worst land determine the market value of commodities? In non-land-based industries, market value is at first determined by the differences between the firms within the sector, but over time, competitive pressures over the short to medium term will force efficiencies within each firm in the industry sector and force the least efficient capitals to become more efficient. This is a capitalist assumption. And eventually all firms within the sector produce commodities at the same market price. This assumes kind of lots of perfect conditions. So you need to understand that in the classical and neoclassical case, a lot of things are assumed to be either the same or different, certain ceteris paribus, Pareto optimality, blah, 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 blah. These assumptions are not good in reality, but they form a kind of sort of idealized situation, a model situation, which we could operate to just do this little teaching thing. On the other hand, with land-based industry sectors, competitive pressure cannot change the features of land. There will be a permanent advantage to capital investing on the best land and a permanent disadvantage to capital investing on the worst land. As a result, the worst land, in this case, the sloping land, which reduces the productivity of the capital invested on the land, establishes the market value of commodities. When capitalist A and capitalist B sell their commodities in the market, the value of the commodities produced by capitalist B on the worst land establishes the market value for these commodities. So you see the range of value being produced, being determined by land in this context. Differential rent 1, DR1, arises from this difference, the difference between the value of the commodities produced on the worst land compared with the value of the commodities produced on the best land. Consider a more complex and realistic example where there are 4 equal sites of urban land with the same size, terrain, and so on, except for one difference, their location. When this is taught in city planning courses, this is the example, as one of my friends who went to city planning schools said, this is about shopping centers. The optimal position, where are you going to put your shopping center? The first site, Site A, has the best location for a firm within its industry. It is located in the center of its market in the central business district, CBD. The second site, Site B, is located in the middle suburbs. Site C is in an outer suburb. And Site D is located on the urban fringe, far from its markets in the CBD. This is the difference as in the urban, the suburban, and the ex-urban, for example. In this example, the capitalists investing on the urban sites are specialized design offices producing CAD/CAM design and 3D printing, but this example could equally apply to many other businesses, such as those in construction, textiles or fashion, which designs and produces clothing, footwear and jewelry. Publishing, it could be another possibility, including digital publishing and websites, accommodation, and food production, such as restaurants and cafes. You know, your standard kind of city that has people close to business, but close to home. The 4 capitalist firms invest on their sites an equal amount of constant capital, C, such as buildings, raw materials, and technology, variable capital, such as labor power, and all produce the same commodities with the same use value and with the same rate of profit. The capitalist invested on Site A, located in the CBD, benefits from its location. Their urban agglomeration effects, such as lower transport and communication costs, a large supply of skilled labor, close and cheap access to customers and suppliers, and higher knowledge spillover rates. Silicon Valley, or in the New York Manhattan case, Silicon Alley. Site D, by comparison, located on the urban fringe, has limited access to a skilled workforce and its customers, has high transport and other costs, and does not benefit from knowledge spillovers. The middle suburban sites, that is sites B and C, will have some benefits arising from location, fewer than Site A, but more than Site D. As a result, although all sites are equal in terms of quantities of capital invested on them, the firm on the CBD land is more productive, producing more commodities for the same capital inputs than sites B and C, with Site D being the least productive. When the commodities are sold on the market by the 4 firms, the market value for the commodity is established. Ordinarily, if there had been no intervention by landed property being property of a certain ownership type, the market value would be the value set by the average conditions of production for the bulk of the commodities. However, with the intervention of a natural feature of land, the worst soil, i.e. which yields no rent, is always the one regulating the market price. Or, in other words, the market price is regulated by capital invested in the worst soil. So what you're looking at is the parameters of a particular kind of site. Returning to our example of the 4 sites, Table 5.1 shows the 4 firms mobilize an equal magnitude of capital, but on different sites. Site A is best able to use its capital to produce 4 commodities. On the Site D, the worst located site used an equal amount of capital, but can only produce 1 commodity. In the suburban sites, the better situated sites, Site B used an equal amount of capital to produce 3 commodities, and the less well-located site C uses its equal amount of capital to produce two commodities. So you can scale that up to hundreds, thousands, or some other multiple of the commodity. In other words, capitals invested on the more advantageous sites are more productive and therefore capture more surplus profit, whilst the capital invested on the worst land, which sets the market value, captures no surplus profit. It is this surplus profit, which capitalists have captured because of the features of the land where they're located, that landed property then demands as rent, while the capitals invested on the less advantageous sites are less productive, differentially speaking. And without going through all the numbers that will make your brain hurt, there is a table 5.1 for differential rent one, equal capitals invested on different lands. And, so site D is the zero term, in effect, the bottom line, and site A is the best. And yes, people do make these kinds of calculations for location. You can do all these little factoring things because of the beauty of having spreadsheets, and you can make location decisions with not mathematical precision necessarily, but if you think about averages and you look at time and history and productivity of firms and rates of profit and other kinds of things, it can get very ugly, but you can actually make these kinds of decisions. In fact, those are the kinds of decisions for Walmart, for example. I assume there's probably a spreadsheet that shows how many competitors will be displaced by the position of a Walmart. This example assumes, for the sake of simplicity, that there is demand for all the commodities supplied, and there are no barriers to the competitive operation of the market. So, you've already assumed certain things, with the escalation exception of that caused by the location of the land. Similarly, although this example assumes the distinguishing natural feature of the urban sites is their location, the same results would be achieved even if the land was affected by other natural features which advantage or disadvantage the capital of the capital invested on them. For example, the orientation of the sites towards or away from the sun. Now, that's, assuming it's a kind of thing, agriculture, which would affect, for example, the productivity of the capitals invested in the production of solar energy, gardening, or urban farming. Or the slope of the site's terrain, which would affect, for example, the productivity of capitals invested in building construction. Stuff tends to roll down hills. It's harder to pour concrete, blah, blah, blah. This example of equal capital invested on different lands explains two essential features of differential rent. First, differential rent and the surplus profit, which is its basis, does not appear magically in the economy from nowhere. It emerges from the process that establishes the market value at which commodities are sold. So there's dependency on this market thing. And people will trash socialism or communism because, there are no markets. This is people put the thumb on their scale, blah, 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 blah. Specifically, the potential for differential rent arises from the surplus of surplus value or surplus profit that is captured by capitalists who have greater productivity because of the advantageous natural features of the land. A note, of course, that you could still kill kulaks, etc. Second, the owner of the land, as always, will demand a tribute, a rent, from the capitalist for the lease of the site. Recall that there are people who are willing to build to suit if you see those signs. In other words, the landowner will get rent from you because they'll build the buildings on their particular site and then lease it to you at a certain charge, of course, including the investments and blah, 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 of making, sort of custom buildings or whatever facilities, more electricity for your equipment, etc. However, there are clear limits on what can be captured as differential rent. Marx's analysis of DR1 shows that there is a maximum limit on the amount of value that can be captured as differential rent 1, which is determined by the magnitude of surplus profit that is appropriated by the capitalists. Similarly, the potential maximum rent that can be captured by landlords varies from site to site, depending on the extent to which the features of the land facilitate or hinder the production of surplus profit. In practice, does the landowner automatically capture all of the capitalist surplus profit or do only some of the surplus, or only some of the surplus profit? Economics cannot predict the outcome of the struggle within the social relation between each landowner and capitalist. Within the limits set by the economic processes, how much surplus profit the landowner captures depends on historically specific contextual factors, such as a power differential in the social relation between the landowner and the capitalist, lords and vassals, the negotiating skills of the parties, and more generally, the status of the class struggle between landowners and capitalists in particular cities and at particular times. So that's one differential rent one. Differential rent two. Thus far, we've considered the differential rent that arises when equal capitals are invested on unequal lands, that is, hills and flat, where, or hills and flatlanders, whatever, where DR1 is determined by the difference between the yield from capitals operating on the best land and the yield of capital on the worst land. By its nature, DR1 arises from how the natural features of the land, this is a deterministic distinction, enable or hinder the productivity of capital, not from the characteristics of the land itself. So it is this, you assume natural features that, you could go in and bulldoze the darn hill, and that is what happens in strip mining. So, stuff like this happens. So it's not like other stuff happens. Would that it be so simple? Differential rent two, DR2, on the other hand, arises when unequal capitals are invested on equal land. When this occurs, larger capitals invested on equal lands will generate larger quantities of surplus value and hence larger surplus profits, which can be appropriated by landowners as rent. Consider, for example, 4 equal urban sites with different magnitudes of capital invested on them, which are producing the same commodities. This could be a land site that has different amounts of capital invested in it over time, or one which is subdivided into 4 lots with different magnitudes of capital invested on each of the 4 lots. Site A has 6 units of capital, produces 1 commodity. Sites B, C, and D are invested with 70, 80, and 90 units of capital respectively and produce 2, 3, and 4 commodities. So, imagine that I'm up here drawing on the board with the 4 plots and blah, blah, putting numbers in. As the lands are equal, they have no impact on the formation of the market value. And then market prices get set. Some or all of the surplus value, the surplus profit, could be appropriated by the landlord as differential rent too. In Marx's writing, The Transformation of Surplus Profit into Ground Rent, Marx considers multiple variations for how differential rent too may arise, such as a case where the additional capital on the equal land has a constant, decreasing, or increasing effect on the productivity. And in all cases, there is a relative rise in DR2 with the addition of capital. DR2, differential rent 2, has a number of qualities. First, differential 2 is not independent of DR1 because the existence of DR2 is not possible without the presence of DR1. So these are codeterminate kinds of ideas. Also, second, differential 2 is not permanent. As occurs with any industry sector and capitalism, a larger than normal investment of constant capital in new equipment, machinery, technology, and so on gives a capitalist a short-term productivity advantage over their competitors, which allows them to capture the additional surplus value. However, over the longer term, competition between capitalists causes a general diffusion of equipment and technologies across the industry sector, and the additional surplus value in differential 2 arising from the first mover advantage is lost. If you will recall the film Earth with the introduction of the new tractor. Third, DR2 and DR1 have an interactive, not a cumulative effect on each other. For example, the best sites generating more DR1, which will also be the ones selected for greater investment. So, there's an effect here, an information effect, actually, generating more DR2 because they afford the best promise that the capital invested on that site will be more profitable. On the other hand, the worst sites, which generate little or no differential rent 1, are less likely to have capital invested on them and therefore will generate no or little DR2. Differential rent is a reminder that capitalists who invest higher than industry normal qualities of capital on the best land are not guaranteed to capture higher than industry returns because some or all of the benefits of the investment on that land would be captured by the landowner as rent. So rent covers this weird difference. You may get a first mover advantage, but this might suggest that rents might go up, assuming that you didn't have contracts, et cetera. It is in the sense that landowners block capital. This is an important idea that there's a kind of resistance that landowners represent, and that is historically, kind of provable. Landowners are clear disincentive to capitalist investment on land. Capitalists who invest extra capital on land in the hope of producing greater profits face the certainty that some or all of the surplus profit they create will be captured by the landowner as differential rent. This is, this is Trumpist activity at all. As a result, over time, the rate of investment in land-based industries slows relative to investment in other industries. The diffusion of productivity, increasing investment into land-based sectors slows. In the best case scenario, capital technology continues, but at a slower rate over time, all other factors being equal. In the worst case, investment ceases. Technology is no longer modernized, the land-based industry stagnates, and unemployment increases. Prices of production, as just discussed, differential rent is made possible when intra-universe industry competition, that is competition within each industry sector, establishes a market value for each commodity. However, intra-industry competition is just one factor in determining the final price of each commodity. The final price of a commodity produced in one industry sector also depends on the competitiveness and productivity of capital in that sector compared with the profitability of capitals in all other industry sectors across the whole economy. That is, the final price of a commodity is also affected by inter-industry competition, which creates in each commodity's price of production. This section considers how prices of production are formed, and the following section shows how these prices of production make it possible for landowners to capture absolute rent. Now, I think you can see, perhaps you can, that absolute rent you can assume is a kind of constant in the Marxist context. Recall, all capitalist economies are divided into various specialized industry sectors, such as agriculture, manufacturing, transport, wholesale and retail, and finance. Each industry sector has its own rate of profit, R prime, calculated as the ratio of the surplus value S produced by the industry in proportion to the constant capital C and variable capital V used up to create that surplus value. So the rate of profit in simple algebra is that each industry has its own rate of profit, summarized as R prime equals SC plus V. Now, I know that this will make people crazy, but it is a rate of profit for specific sectors, increasing or changing, and it has a surplus value somewhere in there. It has constant capital, C, and variable capital, V. So it has technology and labor, all that kind of stuff. And land has a relation to that. Each industry sector is in competition with the others to maximize their rate of profit. If one industry sector is more profitable than another, capital from low-performing sectors will exit the low-profit industries and move into the more profitable sectors. This continuous flow of capital out of the least profitable sectors into more profitable sectors in search for greater profits leads to constant industry restructuring, innovation, and the growth and decline of employment in the more profitable and less profitable industries, respectively. As investment moves into high-profit industries, competition increases, profit falls, and the rate of profit in the high-profit sector will fall towards the general average economy-wide rate of profit, R prime, big R prime. Conversely, low-profit industries lose investment as some capital exits and moves to sectors where it can get a higher return. Now, you can see that in a war economy where you have multiple war industries kind of relatively proximal to each other and certain skills transfer from one machine operation, for example, or fabricating operation, the skills transfer that you could, as they said during World War II, you could quit one company and walk down the street and get a job at another industry. This presumes a certain type of, frictionless kind of economy, labor market, kind of guaranteed in some ways by this kind of a fiscal policy that provides national defense production profits. This decline continues up to the point where the remaining capitals are able to increase their rate of profit to levels toward the general average economy-wide rate of profit. The general rate of profit, therefore, big R prime, therefore refers to the general return on the investment of all capital in a capitalist economy. It is calculated that the ratio of total surplus value or total social capital, big S, produced in the economy divided by the capitals that were advanced to create and realize that total surplus value, that is total constant capital C and total variable V, that is big R prime equals big S times big C plus V. In other words, the same thing as I was talking about little r as little s, little c, little b, they all get promoted to large capital letters. In a similar way to how competition between capitals within an industry sector establishes a commodity's market value, so too does competition between capitals across the whole economy establish the economy-wide rate of profit that uses to finalize the commodity's price of production. So what competition first in a single sphere achieves is a single market value and market price derived from the various individual values of commodities. And it is competition of capitals in different spheres, which first brings out the price of production, equalizing the rates of profit in the different spheres. In essence, capitalist firms in the least efficient, that is, the more labor-intensive industry sectors that produce commodities with higher than average magnitudes of surplus value, find some or all of that value is transferred by the general rate of profit to the industry sectors where capitalist firms produce their commodities with lower than average value. This is a kind of 19th century argument. The result is that when commodities sell, they sell not at their market value, but at their price of production. This is that thing again I was telling you, the value is not the same as production. A price that includes the market value established within the industry, but also incorporating the allocation of surplus value across the economy. So in other words, this can help explain the offshoring and other kinds of things in the commodity chain, for example, the surplus. Anyway. Recall that when commodities produced with and for capital are exchanged in the marketplace for money, they're not exchanged simply as commodities, as objects with a use value sold at any price determined by the visible hand of the market that balances supply and demand. You know, that's just stupid, but some people still use that argument. Instead, there are distinct limits on what price capitals can sell their commodities for, because all capitals are under relentless economic pressure from the financiers, the employees, the shareholders, competitors to sell their commodities at prices that will realize as much surplus value or profit on capital advanced for production as any other capital the same magnitude as or pro rata to its magnitude. In other words, all sellers exchange their products of capital, the commodities, at a price which will capture their share of the total surplus value, big S, produced in the economy in proportion to the magnitude of the capital used to produce it. The price at which commodities are sold then, that is the price of production, is the price that allocates a portion of the total S, surplus value in the economy, to all the individual capitals in the different industry sectors consistent with the economy-wide general rate of profit. You can see where this can be a problem on a global scale. Profit in China is not the same as profit in America, for example. When a capitalist sells his commodities at their price of production, therefore, they recover money in proportion to the value of the capital consumed in their production and secures profit in proportion to this advanced capital as the aliquot part in the total, it's a proportional part in the total social capital. Their cost prices are specific, but the profit added to them is independent of his particular sphere of production. So their profit is not identical in this context. Table 5.3 gives an example of how the price of production allocates the total S to individual capitals in all industries while making the usual simplifying assumptions to make calculations easier, but which are nevertheless consistent with the labor theory of value and with the reality of the production and circulation of capital. And yes, there are a lot of numbers in it, but you can follow the math. The math is not hard. It is simply a grid with numbers in it, and everything is just added or subtracted. So it's very simple math. Anyway, so it gives you kinds of numbers that assume inter-industry competition forces the total surplus value to be allocated equally to all sectors in proportion to the average magnitude of capital advanced to produce the total surplus. Prices of production arise from an equalization of the values of commodities. This is the assumption of clearing. After replacing the respective capital values used up in the various spheres of production, this distributes the entire surplus value, not in proportion to the amount produced in the individual spheres of production and thus incorporated in their commodities, but in proportion to the magnitude of advanced capitals. So without getting too nuts about this, so thusly, the excess profit captured by a productive sector, an efficient and productive sector, is the source of the absolute rent which is appropriated by landowners. So there's a kind of monopoly advantage built into this. In summary, if you've lasted until now, Marx used labor theory of value at 3 levels of analysis, and this is a microeconomic distinction, and very few microeconomists would presume a Marxist assumption, but it's there. They just don't. They never like to identify it if you're a standard, orthodox economist, because it just gets you into uglier stuff. You have to start explaining why labor gets exploited, and you don't want to do that, at least in an undergraduate intermediate micro course. The individual capitalist firm, the firm within its industry sector, and the industry sector within the economy. And this is standard stuff. You just took the word Marx and labor theory of value out. This would be a kind of standard set of assumptions in introducing a microeconomics course. At the level of an individual capitalist firm, each capitalist produces individual commodities with a cost of production, CI plus VI, plus a profit unpaid surplus value, S. And so we're back to C plus V plus S for the individual firm. I. Having produced a commodity with its individual value, each capitalist in the industry uses the market to determine the market value, which is really obvious, of the particular commodity by benchmarking the commodity against the same commodity produced by other firms in the industry, the market price. The capitalist ascertains the average market value of the commodity, C plus B plus SM. Finally, having established its market value, the capitalist determines the commodity's actual selling price, the price of production. All the unpaid surplus value produced in each industry sector makes up the total surplus value in the economy. This all seems very logical, but no, the Fed doesn't measure surplus value. And if Democratic socialists took over the government, we might actually see in the Fed a surplus value index measure coming out of the Fed, simply because all the numbers are there. You just have to call it surplus value. And this is Paul Koschot's kind of contribution, is that you start beginning to identify what the standard numbers, it's just data. And you can actually start talking in these kinds of ways. Of course, capitalists don't like that because, it sort of shows what's being stolen. So anyway, let me just, we're at the end of the section, and it is the idea of landed property does intervene as a kind of blockage, intervenes in the price of production setting process, and by doing so captures a kind of absolute rent, which for some Marxists gets assumed out because, it's always absolute rent. So it's really kind of a constant in the mode of production called capitalism. Now, I would assert to you that if you wanted to argue for state capitalism of the type of the late Soviet Union and the current People's Republic of China, you could start talking about absolute rents, and that would make people angry, but, whatever, it's there. In San Francisco, there is something called a YIMBY movement, that is Yes in My Backyard. It's a pro-infrastructure development. So the original NIMBY, which is a prominent theory in de facto theory in Connecticut, because you don't want poor people of color near you, but and the zoning kind of proves that, and so a significant number of people of color in Connecticut live in cities, and fewer of them live in certain types of suburbs and exurbs. Some people would claim that we live in whatever portion of Connecticut. And no, that's just not true, but it is true. So YIMBY, Yes in My Backyard, deals with public housing, real estate development, public transport, which is nearly non-existent in Connecticut, and pedestrian safety and transportation planning. So it began in San Francisco in the 2010s amid a major housing affordability crisis, which has been there since the gold rush. So, they really, people are just idiots. Three essential concepts from this book. This is a different book, Code of Capital, which Warren, I think Warren has mentioned it before the other day. It's an excellent book. Katharina Pistor has written a book called The Code of Capital, which essentially refers to the idea that a legal infrastructure is really the important way of sort of talking about this land problem. Remember, we were talking about land above, the blockage problem. How do we deal with it? Well, we can deal with it as a legal infrastructure problem, which makes everyone crazy because it means, oh, damn it, doesn't mean that I have to become a lawyer. Now, there are dual degree programs in many large planning programs in the United States where you can get a law degree and a city planning degree simultaneously. You have to take an extra year of coursework. It's no different than who was it? Mitt Romney has a JD and an MBA in a similar type of arrangement, except that it's a business degree. So capital is not just money, but a legal infrastructure of property rights that shapes power and wealth in society. It's a perfect reason for, Mitt Romney to have both a law degree and a business degree, a graduate business degree. The Code of Capital, comprised of legal frameworks, shapes who benefits from capital and determines economic outcomes. So, this is why people with law degrees don't practice law in the big sense. They practice business and occasionally use their law degree. Understanding the legal coding of capital is crucial to questioning and potentially altering the structures of inequality and power in society. So this is the way of getting at the problem, at least one method of doing that. And Pistor would not call herself a Marxist by any means, but she has identified the key problem that occurs in socialist economies. So, for example, is it Pashkunis or whatever? The guy who discusses a communist law. He wrote at least the foundational texts of how to deal with law in the Soviet Union. Pashkunis, whatever. The point is that law in the Russian context seems actually quite draconian and very much the kind that Ayn Rand would sort of squeal about. And in the People's Republic of China, a law was, is Kardashian. You were presumed guilty, and pretty much this, having a lawyer meant shit. And your rights weren't really protected, but revisions in that law in both Russia and in China have at least moved slightly more forward towards certain types of individual rights. But it is made more problematized, of course, by the quote unquote Code of Capital. I'm not sure Pistor mentions that in her book, but I think it's an important distinction to make. And ultimately, the law profession itself has to change, which is why the emergence of the critical legal studies in the 70s, 80s at Harvard created an entire body of rethinking the problem of law and the use of judges and lawyers and stuff like that. And a side product of that is the critical race theory, which is only a very small side element, but it is essentially an extension of what is now called law and political economy, the law and political economy movement, which is embedded in most major law schools, and which is good because ultimately it is the same thing. If some of us had seized the power of university administrations, we would tack on, as does some programs, that is, you can get a PhD in city planning with a JD with a law degree in a simultaneous degree. There's several of those kinds of programs. Northeastern has one, so not all the big ticket item elite law schools have them, but some of the less elite law schools have them as well, particularly for this reason, so that you would have PhD level skills that would offset or add to your law degree. Okay, I've said enough. I used up the entire time. I used up an entire 60 minutes of yakking, and I probably could yak for another hour, but I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. You get to talk now. Larry.
Well, go ahead, Larry.
Um, yeah, so the let's see, I had a couple of questions. I'm trying to figure out which one to go with. You know, I guess one question is, are there, it seemed like there's a bit of circularness in there when this, sort of relationship between landholders and capitalists was discussed with the differential rent. And I was like, hey, aren't there any people that sort of straddle both sides of that thing?
Yes, indeedy, they do. Some people go into, Trump only engages in a certain type of real estate. He has no interest in industrial real estate, for example, which is actually has very clear-cut distinctions and is not as weaselly. Whereas, him and Kushner, et cetera, they only deal in so-called commercial real estate, which is not industrial real estate. So it's easier to get away with that shit. Yes. To answer your question, yeah.
Well, and so then to kind of an extension of that is, I was thinking about, this was kind of talking about like city land, at least in my mind initially, but then I was like, oh, what about like farms that happen to be next to each other and the wind blows across, the seeds kind of thing. And then there's patents involved kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's, Ronald Coase and the idea of cost benefit analysis, where the wind, assuming that the wind blew, always in one direction, you could assume that was a kind of cost of doing business, an advantage if you had two farms.
Right. Yeah. Like one land would be better because of that. Like,
right.
And I guess the same would be true for something like a refinery,
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's the town of what's it in it's not Richmond, it's
Martinez.
Martinez, that's right.
Yeah. Cool, thanks.
Okay. I'm glad I could answer it. I actually could provide answers.
Yeah.
Who's next? Warren.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you for the shout out. Appreciate that. You know how I love that book. So
yes,
appreciate that.
It's worth people listening. It's worth people listening to her lectures, because at least that gives the kind of the
if everyone goes out to the YouTube, the iNet YouTube channel, it has the entire book essentially, in video form where she talks about it. Obviously, there's more information in the books that she doesn't cover, like the history of where the idea for trusts came from.
Yes, absolutely.
That's not mentioned in the videos.
Yes, absolutely.
But aren't they building light rail from New Haven up to Hartford?
I don't know if it's light rail or not. That's
they're doing some sort of they're doing some sort of like public transport, New Haven to Hartford, like with stops in between.
Yes, I think that's one option, but I think there's arguments about the rail. I mean,
there are arguments about the rail and the eminent domain and getting the land needed to build it. So they are trying. So I guess you have to give them that. So
yeah.
It's like eminent domain is such a hard thing to do correctly.
Yeah. I apologize to Joe. I didn't leave the share up. I was stupid again. My little brain was not working. To respond to your question, yes, if you've seen, it's like East Palestine in Ohio. The rail between Hartford and New Haven is shit.
Yes.
They have to relay the entire roadbed. I think it just is ugly looking, and so they can't go very fast. So I've taken the train between the Amtrak between because it actually stops at a station very proximal to my house, not fully proximal, but closer than New Haven in terms of going to a station. And it is a real problem. The fact is, if they could get high-speed rail or any kind of decent rail, so they could raise the roadbed speed. I think a conductor was telling me they can't. There's a certain road speed limit. They can't do it. Can't do it to Hartford. Just fly off the road or something. And similarly, there should be better roadbed between Hartford and Boston. But that's just me talking.
Yeah, understood. It's hard.
No, well, it's the same problem that exists for a BART. That is the Bay Area Rapid Transit. It's like some counties didn't want to pay for that you need really a better roadbed between the two, to complete their section of a complete unified Bay Area rapid transit.
Same thing with the LA train system that they're trying to build.
Yeah.
Oh God, that is a mess. But then again, it's so swampy out there. Sorry, Mr. Hayes.
No, I was just gonna say,
the Wilshire line.
Yeah, which they're working on about a mile from me, or maybe 2 miles, something like that. But my question is, and I don't think you guys know this, and I'm definitely not an engineer, but it seems like, and they've done this before, they're building like miles with multiple stations, but they never open them. I was like, why don't you guys open one station, then the next, instead of doing the whole thing? It takes years and years and years. At least have a station here, a station there as they progress. Do the whole thing in one step by step, which is how I think they're doing it. You know what I mean? So you just don't have anything, and then you have everything. How about give us a bit at a time as you build it?
Well, that it's less about engineering and more about budgeting.
Yeah, I met someone when I was in Mexico working on the Mayan train, and she's got a supervisory role, and she's a Marine. She lived in the same casa that my friend does, and she's a Marine. So I don't know. I mean, I could not conceive of our Marines doing something like that, but she only gets 2 days off a month, and she works like 14-hour days. And they just do a section and then move on. And obviously they're putting a lot of pressure on getting it done quickly. But yeah, it'd be interesting to learn more about that. But what you were talking about made me think of it.
Railway construction is a big problem. There's several stories about the Transcontinental Railroad that have that similar kind of problem of not those necessarily competing, but that is the story of Blazing Saddles, Rock Ridge, right through Rock. Anyway, that's kind of the same problem.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Let me stare at the Soul Train. Yes, indeed, Larry.
For what it's worth, years ago, they were originally going to keep extending the line that they're now extending, but they stopped because near La Brea tar pits, there was some kind of gas explosion or something. So they just shut it all down. They never did it. But for some reason, they're able to do it now. Maybe better technology. I don't know. But it's very frustrating that this thing it's taken so damn long.
Track technology, is actually proceeding fairly well, but the maintenance of track is kind of fallen behind. And sometimes, if there's this program, a Canadian program, which is on Nat Geo that I watch, there's only, I think, one series of it, but it's sort of fun to watch, and that is Mighty Trains, where they talk not only about the fancy trains that go from one place to another for holidays, but also the facts of track maintenance, about how they have to drill new tunnels and shit. It's actually quite fascinating if you're a kind of train spotter type. Thanks, Larry, for putting up that BART map. You can just see there's something missing. There's the missing component between San Jose down at the bottom there, and there's the missing loop that goes up through Marin.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like an updated map. The original system, it isn't even that far.
I mean, if you wanted to take a loop, you could do it, but it would be the worst loop ever. In fact, I'm surprised no one's ever tried to do a article or two on that. That is, you start one place and you take the entire loop down through San Jose, go back up and try and get across and back to San Francisco for some reason. You could do it. It's just that how many, you'd have like 5 different transfers.
Yeah, you'd have to take Caltrain for part of it, I think.
Right.
Yeah, there is a video that I saw that a guy put a GoPro camera like on the front of a BART train at Millbrae, and took the longest route. I think it's the yellow line that goes all the way out to like Antioch, and
yeah, absolutely.
Told this really cool story along the way, and he interviewed people. Yeah, it was really cool. Let me see if I can find that.
That would be cool. Because Antioch, that's the far reaches of the end of the line. Way the fuck up there.
Yeah.
But, for some of us whose lives would be made, more interesting, I suppose, if we could live out there, somewhere out there, that'd be just the coolest thing. Where is it? It's a small town. It's across from where it's in the north end, and it's the little bay that's near Mare Island. What is that name of that little town? Some artists live out there. It's really the coolest little place. I've had lunch out there before. It's just, it's like, you're out there, the water's calm and, just peaceful.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. We waxed philosophic about the best places to live in the Bay Area.
It's got some spots, yeah.
I will say, despite all the issues and the endless time it takes to complete various subway lines here in LA, downtown for a very, very long time has been fantastic. If you're going to be a commuter like that, it's great because that spreads out quite a bit of the region. But otherwise, it's iffy.
Well, there are just so many Pyrrhic problems of this, that there were years of fighting over whether there was going to be an extension up into the valley, into the San Fernando Valley.
Yeah, and I've taken that one.
And of course, the train business of going out to Riverside. Well,
yeah. Well, first they went to San Gabriel or Pasadena, and while my girlfriend was at the time was still living there when they opened it up finally. But now they're even extending it miles and miles further east, apparently. And when I was a kid, I remember thinking, why don't they have like a train right in the middle of the freeway? And now they do. That's it.
How long did that take? How long did that fucking take?
Yeah, well, when I was a kid, until I guess I was in my 40s when they finally opened it up in that area. Yeah, in the middle of the freeway. So decades in my case.
Well, the comparison you make is how many bullet trains exist in China and how many bullet trains exist in the United States. That's just the basic comparison.
Yeah, we have slingshot trains, not bullet trains.
Trebuchet trains. Anyway, I've gone past my allotted time. I thank you for your attention. Joe, you can shut the thing down if you want, if you're still awake.